What is the definition of a god? Well, a god is a deity or supernatural being who is considered divine or sacred, and in Yu-Gi-Oh, we all know that the Egyptian gods represent this in the anime. However, in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, the Egyptian gods completely failed to live up to this expectation since Konami nerfed them into the ground. To add on to this, they're not the only gods in Yu-Gi-Oh, as in some lores, they have their own gods, such as Sophia, goddess of rebirth from the Dual Terminal lore, and Avia, the rebuilder of worlds from the World Legacy lore. All of them have godlike powers in their respective lores, as well as their effects. However, in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, they never saw any play. So it begs the question, who is the real god of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh? Well, I think many people will agree that it's Masterpiece, the True Draco Slaying King. If you haven't played True Draco at full power, especially for those who only play Master Duel, you have no idea how powerful this deck was when this guy was around. And in this video, I'll be going over how this guy changed the way Konami designs boss monsters. So without any more intros, let's jump into this, shall we? First, to understand what changes Masterpiece made to future card design, let's go over how meta-dominant this god really was. As you all know, Masterpiece was using the meta-dominant True Draco archetype. However, pure True Draco wasn't played too much on release. In fact, they were mostly used as an engine during 2017. The engine consisted of Masterpiece, Dragnotic Diagram, Ignis Heat, Dynamite Knight, and the True Draco spells and traps. This engine benefited a lot of decks as Diagram would pop cards that would want to be popped, and Dynamite Knight / Ignis Heat would punish your opponent by activating True Draco spells and traps from the deck when they activated their cards. Finally, Masterpiece would just add on to the end board of disruptions as he himself is a disruption. You'd be surprised how splashable this engine was, but the deck that used it the most was the meta-defying Zodiac. They gained the most advantage from this engine than any other deck since Zodiac themselves is a one-card combo deck, and cards like Ram synergize well with Diagram. Here, just take a look at Patrick Hoban's build from the July 2017 WCQ. You can see just how well these two archetypes work well with each other. Though, I guess it makes sense since they're both part of the same lore. However, Konami wouldn't let this go on for too long, as on the September 2017 ban list, they banned Dynamite Knight, limited Ignis Heat, and True King's Return. Wait, they didn't hit Masterpiece? That's weird. I thought, oh right, I just remembered. Yeah, they didn't hit Masterpiece, and to say that this was confusing is an understatement. It was completely asinine that they hit the other True Draco cards, but not Masterpiece, or even Diagram for that matter. My best guess to why they did this is because they still wanted to sell True Draco, but they didn't want the engine to be playable anymore. And this kind of worked as pure True Draco was still a meta deck. However, they had to deal with Tier 0 Spyro first before they became Tier 1. Anyways, after Spyro died, in 2018, pure True Draco became arguably the best deck of the format, alongside Pendulum Magician. You might be asking, why was pure True Draco still good despite the hits in 2017? Well, one of the biggest reasons was obviously the fact that Diagram was still at 3 alongside with Masterpiece, but there was also a third card that made up for True Draco's losses, and that's Kaiba's famous Card of Demise. Even though it's nothing like its anime counterpart, this card and True Draco just worked so well together due to the fact that True Draco can bypass all of Demise's restrictions. Now, I will say this was a thing in 2017, it's just that Zodiac was so meta-dominant that I feel like the pure version was somewhat overshadowed, but that's just my opinion on that. Moving on, let's go into what makes Masterpiece himself so good. Now, I feel like I can make the argument that Masterpiece is one of the most versatile boss monsters in the game, as he can make himself unaffected by 2 of the card types, and use his pop effect to deal with the last types of cards that would threaten him. Basically, he could be unaffected by the card types your deck specializes in, which can make it harder for you to out. As an example, let's use 2018's Pendulum Magician. They focused on monsters like Odd Eye's Vortex Dragon, Supreme King Dragon Starving Venom, Ignister Prominence, spells and traps like Time Pendulum Graph, before Double Iris got banned. Masterpiece could be unaffected by monsters and traps, and it could provide the Pendulum player a hard time to out him, as even if they had a monster that could run him over, he could just pop it. Another example we'll use is Magical Musketeers, cause why not? Since they focus on spells and traps, Masterpiece could be unaffected by those 2 types, and use his pop effect to deal with any monster that would threaten him. So you can really see that depending on what deck you were playing, Masterpiece could give you a hard time by making himself immune to what your deck specializes in. However, I will say that in most cases, Masterpiece was unaffected by monsters and traps, and the reason for that was because at the time, we didn't have that many good spell cards that could remove him, and the ones that we did have like Kaiju Slumber, Raigeki, and Darkhole were limited at the time. So a true Draco player didn't need to always make Masterpiece unaffected by spells. Now, while I talked about what made Masterpiece himself so great, I haven't even mentioned the other cards that made him harder to deal with, as Diagram could protect him from battle once, meaning that you need 3 monsters with more than 3,000 or more attack points to beat him, as his pop effect will deal with the second one. However, none of that will even matter because of True Draco Apocalypse, which can cut the attack points of all your monsters in half, so regardless, you ain't beating him by battle. Furthermore, as you expect, True Draco played floodgates like Monarch's Erupt, Imperial Order, Skill Drain, TC Boo, and more, which could be easy to get to thanks to Cardo Demise. Also, side note, another reason why Masterpiece was mostly unaffected by traps was so that your own floodgates like Skill Drain don't hurt him. One final thing to point out is that the True Draco traps let you tribute summon Masterpiece on your opponent's turn, and they pop monsters when they're sent to the graveyard, so you could summon Masterpiece and pop a monster in the process while still having Masterpiece's pop effect itself. So despite the hits, True Draco still had enough power to stay tier 1. Though all of that ended as on May 2018, TCG finally decided to ban Masterpiece, while also giving back Dynamite Knight. Ironically, despite this, True Draco was still in the meta mainly because Diagram and Cardo Demise were never hit until January 2020. This kind of shows that hitting Masterpiece was not enough, but regardless, ever since 2018, Masterpiece has stayed on the ban list and never came back once. Now, with all that out of the way, let's get into how Masterpiece changed the way Konami designs boss monsters. And I would like to make the argument that because of him, Konami changed 2 things when designing a boss monster. The first thing is that unaffected monsters in particular nowadays don't have their own built-in disruptions. During Arc V, Konami started making way more unaffected monsters like Towers, Immortal Phoenix, Zushin, Crimson Nova, and more. But Masterpiece was the one to have his own built-in disruption. However, after he was banned, they kind of stopped doing that, as you can see with cards like the Arrival Cyberus and Blackwing Full Armor Master. Don't get me wrong, those cards are great, but during the opponent's turn they can get killed by battle, unlike Masterpiece who can pop any monster that would kill him. Also, I know the Arrival has Damari, but if you don't get to Damari, then the Arrival is just a sitting duck, proving my point that Konami for a while didn't want to give unaffected monsters their own disruption again. I think the reason why Konami strayed away from this is because having a boss monster who is unaffected and having a disruption is too good and can make it even harder to kill. Though, as you might have already pointed out, Purely Noir is an unaffected monster with a disruption. In my opinion, I think Konami is dipping their toes in the water with this type of design again. But this time, they're making it more balanced. What do I mean? Well, Noir needs 5 or more materials to be unaffected, and it needs a level 1 Purely monster as material to use its disruption during the opponent's turn. So you kinda have to put some work into bringing out Noir's full power, and the only reason why you're able to do that is because the other Purely cards help you with that. This is something that you didn't really need to do with Masterpiece, as you just needed to search him and then tribute continuous spells and traps as well as monsters to summon him. So I personally believe that we might see more of these types of boss monsters in the future. However, Masterpiece has shown Konami that if you want to make an unaffected monster with a disruption, you're going to have to water it down in some sort of way like you did with Noir. Alright, moving on to the second thing that Masterpiece changed is how Konami gives boss monsters destruction effects. You might have heard of this before, as this is something that Dual Logs has pointed out, and honestly, he's kind of right, in that after Masterpiece, and to the extent Zodiac Dragon were banned, Konami kind of changed their ways when giving boss monsters a destruction effect that would work during either player's turn. Now obviously they still make them, like DPE and Emperor Charles. However, with DPE, he requires you to pop your own card, meaning that if your opponent somehow clears your board at activation and you have nothing to pop, then DPE's effect will fizzle. Or as in Emperor Charles' case, you need to fulfill a condition as Charles needs you to equip a card to him before he could pop something, meaning that you can't use the pop whenever you want, like you could with Masterpiece or Dryden. Now, you might say that both Masterpiece and Dryden did have cost/conditions, but they were so easy to pull off that it really doesn't feel like a cost or a condition. Another example I can provide is Orbital Hydralander, where you need at least 2 monsters with different names if you want to pop a card. This is a card that came out in Code of the Duelist after Maximum Crisis, which may show that Konami was already changing the way they designed pop effects on monsters after seeing what Masterpiece has done. Now, I'll admit, this seems very skeptical and I could be wrong, but think about it. Has there been another boss monster whose pop effect was like Masterpiece and Dryden? Well, from what I looked through, not really. So, in a way, I think I can confidently say that Masterpiece and to the extent Zodiac Dryden have changed the way Konami designs monsters with pop effects. Now, before I end the video, I want to ask you guys something. Do you think Masterpiece can come off the ban list? I was thinking of making this into another video for the future, but I want to hear your thoughts first. So let me know your thoughts below in the comments if you think Masterpiece can come back or not. Well, there you go folks. Now you know the history of Masterpiece and how he changed the way Konami designs boss monsters. Now, I do want to say something real quick. I do plan on uploading more again in the future, and my goal is to reach at least 1K before the summer ends. So I hope you enjoyed this video and subscribe for more. I really appreciate it, and thanks for watching. Have a good day.